it's truly an honour. We're truly delighted to be joined this morning by Minister Paschal Donohoe, who is here for ECOFIN and Eurogroup related meetings in his capacity as President of the Eurogroup. Very busy schedule, so as I say, Minister, we're delighted that you're able to take time out of your day today to join us for this event. Minister, of course, you're a graduate of Trinity College. Your degree, your background in political and in politics, excuse me, and economics. First elected as a TD to Ireland's Parliament in February 2011. Since then, you've held various ministerial positions, including as Minister for European Affairs, Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, and of course now as Minister for Finance, and of course also at the same time holding the role as President of the Eurogroup. So I'd say a true honour. We're delighted to be joining, and with that I'll hand over to Aoife.
Thanks. Minister, you're very welcome to sunny Lisbon this morning. I'm sure it was a bit different than leaving Dublin last night or this morning. Was it this morning, yeah?
Well, Aoife, I left Dublin, left Phibsborough just before 5:30 this morning. And it won't surprise you, Aoife, or surprise anybody to know that it was cold and wet and a little dark. So it's delighted to be here. I just want to thank Ambassador Victory for the invitation and for the welcome that I've received. The honour is mine to be here. One of the reasons I'm really delighted to be here and meeting you all is because of the great value that I place on the relationship between Ireland and Portugal. I'm a very, very regular visitor to Portugal myself, and I've spent much time here with my family over the years, whether it be in Lisbon, whether it be outside Lisbon, other parts of Portugal. I have a good personal appreciation of how wonderful this country is and the importance of the relationship between Ireland and Portugal. And then in recent years in my European work, I've built up a really great relationship with different members of the Portuguese government, with my colleague, Mario Centeno, who's now the Governor of the Central Bank of Portugal, and with the current Minister for Finance for Portugal, João Lau, who has also been President of the finance ministers of all of the European Union over the last 6 months. So it's the first time I've left Ireland in a while, and if I was to come anywhere in my first visit, it would be here. So Aoife, and also I understand this group has been marked its 5th year of existence, and thank you to you, Aoife, and to all of your colleagues for sustaining the group across that period. It's great. So over to you, and if the questions are very difficult, I'll of course invite the ambassador to answer them, but in the absence of that, I'll do my best.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a very easy one, which is
these are always the hardest, Aoife. I know you're obviously experienced at this, and you're going to lull me in with what is a deceptively easy question.
So the first one is just, we're very familiar with your role as Minister for Finance and what that entails, but what does being President of the Eurogroup actually mean?
Thank you for asking a question about that. So basically my role is it's an elected office, it's an election. I have to win a majority of votes from other finance ministers, and I was extremely privileged to do that last year. And in my role as President of the Eurogroup, it is my job to coordinate the policy efforts of all of the finance ministers who share a euro with regard to, in particular, budgetary policy and in relation to decisions about banking policy, and then decisions regarding how the euro is formed and how it is regulated. So practically what that looks like is constant engagement, dialogue, negotiation with finance ministers all over Europe, and a huge amount of effort then getting ready for meetings that take place once a month. So it is a big part of my job. I'm very lucky to have an amazing team located in Dublin and in Brussels. And then between us, we put an awful lot of political and diplomatic effort into developing work programs that we then implement every month.
And do you set the policies that the central bank follows, or do you work closely with them to do that?
I work closely with them. So there are some areas of economic policy that are exclusively and independently the work of the Central Bank of Europe. That would be, for example, with regard to the interest rates that are set by the ECB, would, for example, relate to the amount of money within the euro area and how the Central Bank of Europe makes that money available and when. And they're decisions that the ECB are completely independent on, and they make decisions independent of ministers with regard to that. But I work very closely with them. And then there are many other decisions in relation to budgetary policy that are exclusively the remit of finance ministers. So we have particular parts of our roles that we implement independently, but we have a job to coordinate. And again, it's part of my role to try and make that happen.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to move back onto a more local level for the next question. You know, and this applies equally, I think, to both Portugal and Ireland. SMEs are very much saying that we're still stuck in a dysfunctional banking system 10, 12 years on from the financial crash of 2008. Do you agree with that? Because most of them are still, you know, obviously the pandemic hasn't helped. It sort of paused the economy, but, you know, we're not really seeing what's actually happening in the market, having paused for such a long time. Do you share that view that it's still dysfunctional, and what can be done about it?
I wouldn't describe our Irish banking system as being dysfunctional. And we have experienced really difficult moments in which we've learned what dysfunctionality can really look like in a banking system. And some of the challenges that we have with regard to our banking system are going to continue to evolve, particularly when we've had two banks just leave Ireland over the last number of months, or I should say indicate their intent to leave Ireland. But it's also still the case that there are needs that our economy, that SMEs want met by our banking system, that they feel are not being met well enough. I would make the point that if we have a business community, even an SME business community that's incredibly valued by me and the government, and they feel like all their needs are being met by our banking system and all the needs are being easily met, that tends to be the first step in other difficulties growing. So the relationship between those looking for credit and those supplying credit, those looking for investment and those funding the investment, always has a degree of tension and always has a degree of difficulty, particularly when we now have a very strong and independent regulator in the background overseas. In terms of what we can do to try to better meet the needs that are there, Orla, it is why, for example, the work that is underway between Permanent TSB and how it could develop in the future with regard to the exit of Ulster Bank from Ireland is a really important development that might better help us to meet some of those needs in the future. But from a state point of view, it is why we have the SBCI, the Strategic Bank Corporation of Ireland. It is why the government makes really important lending programs available to deal with Brexit, to deal with climate. We make them available through our banking system, but we originate them so we can influence and change and influence the price of those loans. So look, there are challenges. There are challenges there that I believe we'll be able to make progress on, but I respectfully differ in the definition of it being a dysfunctional relationship.
Okay. You know, at the same time then, you know, just very briefly, because an awful lot of people going to market are looking to hedge funds and venture capitalists and all of those things. They seem to be a lot less regulated than the banking system. Do you think that that is a risk, or is it an opportunity?
Both. In every transaction, in every economic development, it is always coated with both risk and opportunity. So first, if I look at the role of hedge funds, I think it'd be fair to say a very low share of hedge fund activities currently involved in supporting the economic development of our SME community in Ireland. If I look at the role of seed capital and venture investors, yes, it is the case that they are meeting needs that at times our existing banking infrastructure does not want to meet or isn't capable of meeting. But I think, isn't it ever thus? Isn't it always the case that for riskier, for longer term economic developments that are being led by SMEs, they have a higher level of risk that our banks feel it isn't appropriate for them to be involved in. But then we have an ecosystem beyond that in Ireland that can still meet us. And of course, from an Irish state's point of view, it is, for example, the reason that I set up the Disruptive Technology Fund to better fund through the state forms of innovation that nobody is willing to fund at a rate that is affordable for the entrepreneur. It's also why Enterprise Ireland in particular has such an extensive array of programs, because we recognise that there are needs that our banks aren't able to meet, and EI doesn't exist independently of the Government of Ireland. It has the resources financially and institutionally, because we know there are needs that are not being met in the way our entrepreneurs want. So that is one of our responses back to the very fair issue that you're raising, Aoife.
Great, thanks. Moving on, but in one sense, sticking with SMEs to some extent, the VAT rules are being changed in the 30th of June, 1st of July this year across Europe, and it's going to lead to greater harmonisation. And I think that's actually a good thing for people who are doing online retailing in particular, after the pandemic has shown us how we got stuck with that. Do you think that if this harmonisation of the VAT system is a success, that it will lead to other harmonisations across the tax and social security systems?
Not necessarily, because of course VAT has a particular role as a tax stream within the European Union, as a generator of own resources within the European Union. And sorry, when I say own resources, to explain what that is, because I'm in danger of using the very jargon I'm normally really critical of. Own resources are basically taxes that national governments levy, a share of which is then used to help fund the European Union. And taxes, sales taxes like VAT in Ireland and across Europe are an example of one of those taxes that I think more easily lend themselves to a degree of harmonisation, because they're really important to the operation of the single market. Other taxes are not capable, are less easily lend themselves to that kind of change. So I think you will begin to see more and more kind of harmonisation of some forms of tax. VAT is a really good example of it. I think the next thing you'll see is efforts to have a common form of taxation with regard to the use of plastics within the European Union. But other taxes, for example, with regard to our social insurance systems, with regard to our income taxes, with regard to how we tax businesses, are probably less likely to be quickly harmonised.
But do you think it's a possibility?
There's always possibilities, Aoife, and there's always ways in which changes could happen. But as Finance Minister for Ireland, I'd be pretty acutely aware of some of the risks we would face in the harmonisation of some of those taxes, and we well know national positions with regard to that.
True. I'm going to pause for 1 second to ask if there's any questions in the chat. Arnold, if there was anything, can you jump into me there?
Yeah, good morning. So we have a couple of questions. The first one from Hugh Campbell is asking what is the minister's view on a European basis on the likely impact of changes on fiscal policy for the next number of years, very much, starting to pay back for the cost of managing the pandemic.
So yeah, thank you very much for that question. So I could speak on that particular topic until the sun in Lisbon goes down. And of course, I don't want to do that because we've lots of other important questions to get to. So at risk of getting back into the risk of jargon, a moment which I mentioned there a moment ago, it's so important to realize that the additional debt that we have incurred is financed in a completely different way to the debt that we will be familiar with from the great financial crisis, and indeed the normal, in inverted commas, debt that we would incur. It's financed at far lower interest rates, indeed interest rates that are either at zero or below zero or near zero, for really, really long time periods, so for very, very long maturities. And that will make a profound difference to our ability to deal with that debt. So to give an example of Ireland, if, for example, we make sensible decisions about how we manage spending when we exit the pandemic, and kind of when the pandemic has a different impact on how we run our economies, and if we are successful in getting people back to work in Ireland, that will actually help us deal in the short and for much of the medium term with the debt, and by debt I mean financial debt, consequences of the pandemic. What that does mean is that I am optimistic that we can avoid the harsh decisions that we had to confront in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. But that's not to say, on the other hand, that it will be consequence-free. It's not to say that if you, for example, incur 36 billion euro worth of additional debt for Ireland in an 18-month period, and you see your debt go from 232 billion euro to 238 billion euro, that is consequence-free. It's not. But the consequences, I believe, will be different, and I believe more manageable to where we were a decade ago. Where we will begin to pay more is if we decide we want to spend more permanently. The savers of Portugal won't finance Ireland becoming a permanently bigger state. They will expect us to be able to pay for that ourselves, just as we would expect that if, for example, the state in Portugal wants to become permanently bigger, that will need to be paid for out of taxes and borrowing in Portugal. And that will then begin to have an effect, if we make that choice, on the levels of taxation in Ireland. But even that, those potential changes in taxation are really different to the kind of abrupt changes that we made 10 years ago.
Hope that answered the question, Hugh. I'm going to actually just go forward a little bit, and we'll try and finish up a little bit earlier to get a few more questions, Minister, if that's okay. Because I
think, are you politely telling me I spoke for too long there? The answer there a moment ago.
No.
And you're probably right, but I can. The worrying thing is I could have spoken all day in relation to it. So I would do my best to be brief, but I'm going to be even briefer so we can do more questions.
There's no problem at all. It was just that because you were talking about the pandemic and the financial impact of it, I have a question for you on it. The recovery fund has been decided on, it's been voted on, and it's going to happen. How is it going to work and be accessed in practice?
That's a great question, Aoife, and it's something that is really important here in Portugal, and it's also very important in Ireland, though in truth a little less so, because the scale of the recovery fund for Ireland is a lot smaller as a share of our national income than it would be for our friends in Portugal here. So to explain how it's currently happening, I'll just give you a very practical example. I'll talk about what's happening in Ireland. Next week, actually, we're hoping to take to government our recommendation regarding how that money be spent in Ireland. And basically what we will be doing in Ireland, and I believe will be happening here in Portugal as well, Aoife, is a number of projects will be identified to help the Portuguese economy, to help the Irish economy more quickly recover in a way that is greener and in a way that is more digitally orientated than we would have been pre-pandemic. I'm not too familiar with what the projects are going to be in Portugal, but for example, in Ireland, it will look at how we can invest more in things you'll be familiar with regarding how we increase energy efficiency in particular parts of our country and our economy. And for example, how we can accelerate the spread of digital connectivity in Ireland. So they're the kind of things that we're working on at the moment. And in truth, it will probably create more opportunities for entrepreneurs and businesses like you, Aoife, and those that are on the call here in Portugal than it might in Ireland, because our national efforts in Ireland are bigger in scale versus the Recovery Fund in Ireland, whereas here in Portugal, the mix is going to be a little bit different.
And do you expect that the private enterprises will play any sort of matching role with the investment funding that's going to be done as part of the Recovery Fund?
Gosh, that's a really big question and a really, really good one. So, do I believe they play a matching role? It'll probably be difficult for private capital at the moment to be able to match the scale of public capital investment in economies such as Portugal, for example. And the reason for that goes back to the really important question you put to me earlier on regarding the difficulties that are there in the early phase of a recovery in raising private capital, in raising equity, in generating investment. So I think it will probably be a challenge for private capital investment to match what governments such as the Portuguese government will want to do. But if you can't match it, I think two things are possible. The first one is I would be immensely disappointed if you didn't benefit from it. Benefit from it in terms of the impact it should have in confidence and in consumption in Portugal. And if there were also, secondly, might not be the ability there to match it, there'll certainly be opportunities there to invest with us and alongside us. And I really hope that in particular, later on this year, those opportunities will become really, really visible. And they're probably a little less visible at the moment because there's so much work going on trying to agree the plans themselves. But there will definitely be opportunities, Aoife.
And actually, that leads me to my next question very nicely, which is we've seen Brexit and how financial services was completely excluded from the TCA.
Yeah.
What opportunity does that present across Europe in terms of innovation and developing products focused specifically on the Eurozone?
So again, yeah, very, very important point. So the agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union, for many reasons, most of which are political, did not include services. The impact of that, I think, over time is going, may yet become clear. If I look at where we are from a European point of view, I think from a European point of view, much of our focus will be on how we continue to maintain financial stability. Because, of course, the City of London is a really important global anchor to and provider of liquidity, of capital investment. And we want to ensure that continues to be supplied and continues to be provided to businesses within the Euro area. And I'm absolutely certain we're going to be able to do that. The ECB, state agencies all over the Euro area have done really good work in doing that. If I look at what opportunities there could be, I mean, those opportunities are probably best understood at a national level. So, for example, if I look at what has happened in Ireland, if I look at what has happened in Dublin, we've seen existing financial services providers, existing banks, very significantly grow their footprint within Ireland because they want to remain part of the Euro area. They want to continue to be able to trade their products in a euro-denominated way on EU, financial systems, and they've decided to do it from Ireland. And you've seen businesses in Ireland massively expand their footprint to do that, and you've seen many new businesses move to Ireland because they want to be part of that. So I think the opportunities are probably best understood at a national level. And great and really essential work is underway at a European level to maintain the stability that we need as the UK leaves the European Union. And that has been achieved, and it's been a really important project. Mm-hmm.
And, as part of, we spoke to your colleague, Sean Fleming, earlier on this year for St. Patrick's Day. Sustainability and financial sustainability is a really big issue. As we look at the Recovery Fund and Europe's stated goals of sustainable finance. On the call here, could they mute their microphone for a second? Sorry. So how is this going to be promoted, this idea of sustainable financial services across Europe into the future, you know, and so not only just sustainable financially services, but also the sustainability that it will be working on as well, that capital?
By putting up the price of carbon every year, thereby there being absolute confidence that the price of carbon will go up year on year on year, I think is really essential. We're doing that in Ireland. If you're making investment decisions that are carbon intensive, you'll know the price of carbon in Ireland for 2025 already. And you'll know it's higher than it is in 2021, and you'll know it'll be higher again in 2026. So we need to have stability regarding the pricing of investment decisions that involve carbon, which is all decisions. And then secondly, it's the work then that is underway at EU level in relation to financial taxonomy, where investors, whether they be of all sizes and all scale, will need to be and will want to be more aware of what is the consequence of their decisions to buy financial products and financial services, and how that will affect our environment. And that's why the work of the Commission is so important. And Commissioner Mairead McGuinness is taking the lead on that on behalf of the European Union. And you know, when you're doing something like this, Aoife, you'll always be surrounded by some voices that say you do too much, by other voices that say you're not doing enough. But to Mairead's great credit, I believe, and to her and her team, they're doing it, and they're getting the ball rolling on this. And it is by private capital becoming clear what is the impact of their decisions on our environment in the future, and how that impacts the pricing of decisions today is just central to how we can move financial services onto a more sustainable footing. I mean, just to give you a tangible example of this, though, this is slightly separate to the 2 points I've given you. I mean, did you know, and I suspect some of your viewers may not know, but 38% of all green bonds that were sold in the world recently were euro denominated, bigger than America and bigger than China. And it's a sign of the kind of change that's underway now here in the European Union and the euro, as we reprioritize, as we give the climate emergency the status that it needs in all policy decisions.
And that's when you talk about financial services and financial sustainability, I think we have to ask about cryptocurrencies and what's the Eurogroup view on them. I mean, we know that they're environmentally unsustainable, but as a secure method, and we've just seen these hacking scandals, is there a place for them in the European economy or not?
So at the moment, there is a lot of work going on the way in the European Union in relation to this, and there's a piece of legislation being brought forward that is somewhat nicely titled MiCA, and it is about creating a new regulatory framework for crypto assets that will include Bitcoin, and about how we can ensure that we have the policies available to look at their safety and their regulation. From my point of view, safest place to have your money in is in our currencies that are backed by a sovereign. The sovereign, whether it be a country or whether it be a group of countries, such as the case in the European Union and in our part of the world, can give a safety, a stability, and a predictability that nobody else can match. Leaving aside the environmental consequences of the data mining that's involved in backing up cryptocurrencies, I think the events of recent weeks and days, and even hours, may demonstrate the role of cryptocurrencies in allowing return to be both created and destroyed. But by God, they also demonstrate what can happen if you think you can use cryptocurrencies as a store of value. And policymakers are very alert to what that can mean from a kind of a financial stability point of view, to ensure that people who are not investing in crypto assets or digital currencies are not affected by the decisions of those who do.
So it's quite a serious issue.
It's very serious. I mean, look, amidst the multitude of serious issues that we are dealing with at the moment, there are others that I think you'd all expect us to be putting our energy and time into, which is how we can rebuild our economies to give you, Aoife, and your other viewers the environment that they need to make a living, to employ other people. That is where we're pouring our efforts in night and day at the moment. But I'm very aware of some of the issues that are coming with regard to crypto assets, to new definitions of money. There are opportunities, of course there are. There are opportunities that we can invest in and pursue, but there are also risks, and we have a good understanding of what those risks are.
Mm-hmm. I'm conscious that there's quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to just finish up with one of these future gazing ones. Do you think is going to be a rapid, sustainable and fair recovery, or do you think it's likely to be asynchronous after the pandemic?
So I know what I want it to be, but I know what the risks are of what it might not be. So are the risks there for a recovery? So if you take a step back and look at the impacts of pandemics in the broad sweep of human history, they do tend to be events that magnify vulnerability and magnify inequalities and fractures. That is the impact that they have most of the time. Yes, they do lead to extraordinary periods of creativity and even an exuberance at times, but they do also have the potential to deliver far more darker and difficult challenges as well. And those risks are there, but it's because we recognize those risks that we have, for example, Next Generation EU. It's because we recognize those risks that the European Central Bank has taken extraordinary action. It's because we recognize those risks that governments have invested, like in Ireland, 12 billion euro in 14 months to try to avoid those risks developing. So I am confident that we can deliver a better recovery, but I'm realistic in recognizing the risks that we do face, which is then in turn driving my determination to try to deliver a better recovery in Ireland, and then as president of the Eurogroup to influence the recovery that we want to see happen in Europe, so that it can benefit fairly and equally many who are on this call at the moment, and to allow them to be secure and to find new ways of prospering in a changed Europe.
Great, thank you. Arnold, I'm going to go back to the chat because I haven't been keeping an eye on the questions. So do you have a few questions for the Minister there, please?
Yeah, there were some questions, but I think the Minister actually has already answered most of them. So there was a question about the cryptocurrency. The question was, does it pose a threat to the banking sector, which I think you have answered. There was another question about the green fiscality. What is being done on the green fiscality, which I think you have also kind of answered. And then there was a more general question about, what is the priority of the Eurogroup this year? But that's also, I think it's a recovery, I imagine.
Aoife, you've done a great job.
Yeah.
You've done a great job. Maybe we should let RTE know back home.
Totally prescient, know what everybody's done.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
With a bit of practice, what can I say? But Minister, is there anything you would like just to finish up with? Because I am conscious of your time. Is there anything you would like to finish up with? Because most of our members are smaller companies, and the pandemic has been brutal for many of them, particularly those in tourism and hospitality. Is there any words that you have for them to stay on the horse and keep on going, even though it seems difficult at the moment?
Keep the show on the road, even though the road is very, very difficult and very harsh at the moment. Back home in Ireland, we have demonstrated our willingness to have the back of our SME community in the breadth of support that we have put in place and the speed with which we did it. And I really believe that as we move through this year, there is the prospect for the beginning of a strong recovery. I really, really believe that. And actually, for me, what is on my mind at the moment is I believe the second half of 2021 and 2022 is going to deliver a good rebound for businesses across Europe. Not all, I know, but for many, that will help you get back on your feet. And the reason why things like Next Generation EU are being done is to help nurture that rebound into a recovery that stretches beyond this year and next year. So I know it's really hard. It's really hard for the Irish business community here in Portugal. It's been really hard back home here in Ireland, but we are going to prevail. We are going to overcome this. We are going to get to a better place. And even though it is difficult at the moment, I do believe those difficulties will begin to slowly ebb as we move through the year.
Great, thank you. I love your optimism, it's fantastic. Ralph, have you any last words to say? Thank you for organising this, by the way, much appreciated on behalf of the network.
You're very more than welcome, Aoife. I think Minister Donohoe has absolutely said it all today. So delighted that this event could take place. Thank you to you and to Arnold and all the IPBN team for organising it, for arranging it, for your facilitating of the questions. The Minister said your moderating skills, I'm sure, will be in high demand, perhaps for Morty and maybe other quarters as well. But no, it's a pleasure. And the Minister touched upon the fact that you're approaching your fifth birthday as a network. So what better way to market than today's event? And maybe there might be other opportunities. Mr. Unfortunately, for the obvious reasons, the network hasn't been in a position to meet in person for quite a while, but definitely I'd say everybody's definitely looking forward to that. So let's come up with a plan there, Aoife, for when the time is right, as soon as we can.
Well, I'd love to have the opportunity to meet you all in person. Hope I'll be in a position to come back again professionally. I'm here a lot personally, but I'd love to come back professionally and to be able to meet you all.
You'd be very welcome.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you very much, Minister. Our fifth birthday is on the 22nd of June.
Wonderful. Very good. Rapidly approaching.
We'll have a party.
Yes, indeed. I hope so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us on the call this morning. It has been our pleasure to have you. It has been my pleasure to talk to Minister Paschal Donohoe and to Ambassador Ralph Victory. I would like to remind those of you that are here that the next event is going to be on the VAT harmonisation across the EU, and our board member Pedro Teixeira is going to take us through what that means for small businesses and those doing online retailing throughout Europe. A very important call, because I don't think many people are very familiar with the new regulations just yet. In the meantime, just thank you once again, everybody, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.